Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Connolly. I am a member of our education department here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. And today in the studio, I am joined by two of my friends, Isabel and Jeanette, who are behind the camera controlling all of this beautiful magic you see happening behind me right now. But they are also monitoring our text and our email line. So in a second here, we will have our phone number and our email pop on up. And during this program, it's going to be interactive. So, what that means is I'll be asking for you to share your observations, things that you're noticing, asking questions, wanting to learn more about stuff. We want you to participate in this program with us. So, feel free, if you are watching this live on Thursday, June 5th at 2 p.m. Pacific time, to go ahead and text us at that top number, which is going to be 562 286 1838. Now, if you're watching this at another time, we still love to hear from you. We'll ask that you go ahead and instead just shoot us an email to that email that's listed below. It's going to be live@lbaop.org. Either way, we're really excited to hear from you. We always love to hear your thoughts, your observations, your questions, and you can really participate in this program and shape it. Let us know what you'd like to hear about today. So, we're going to be doing a little bit of an exploration today of a very cool ocean habitat. It's very unique. We see lots of kind of weird or different animals. But before we get there, I want us to start by kind of warming up our brains a little bit. So, I mentioned earlier we're going to be making observations during this program, and we're going to start doing that in this habitat that you see behind me. So, right now, what we have up is one of our webcams of an exhibit here at the aquarium called Blue Cavern. It's a kelp forest habitat. Now, we have a few different webcams of different exhibits here at the aquarium, so if you're wondering what maybe one of our animals is up to or what the habitat is looking like, you can always hop on our website, check them out, see what our animals are up to, what's going on here at the aquarium. But I'll step off so we can kind of see this blue cavern exhibit here in its full glory. And I want us to take a minute and notice some stuff, right? Making observations, being a scientist, is just using your eyes to kind of see what's going on, right? We can look at animals that we see in this habitat, plants we see, things that aren't alive that make up the habitat too. So let's take a minute here and practice those skills, those observation skills, because we're going to be doing that a lot during our program today. We're going to be seeing some really crazy looking things. So let's start warming those brains up to be noticing some things we might see today. I'm definitely noticing that there's lots of kelp in this habitat, right? The kelp is all of this kind of green plant looking stuff that is growing in this habitat, right? Just like we have forests on land that are made of trees, we have forests in the ocean too, but they're made up of kelp, which is an algae kind of similar to a plant, right? So this is the habitat that all these animals are living in, right? We have to have the kelp. I'm also seeing lots of different fish swimming around. So I'm seeing some smaller fish. There was a bigger fish at one point, right? Our giant sea bass that was in there. There's also some sharks swimming around. So I'm seeing kind of some different biodiversity. That word just means there's different animals that are living there, right? Biodiversity is just kind of measuring how many different things are all living together in this habitat. So we've got some good biodiversity here because we're seeing lots of different animals. All right. So I mentioned that this is the kelp forest, and I want to introduce another word to us we're going to be using during this program, and that is that our kelp forest is one type of habitat. So a habitat is just a place in the ocean or on land, right, where our animals are living. It's kind of like their home, right? So right now we're seeing the kelp forest habitat where these fish and sharks and rays are all hanging out, right, and living. But habitats can look like all sorts of different things, right? We can have coral reefs. We can have kelp forests. We can have the wide open ocean, right? So any place that an animal is living, that's their habitat. So we're going to be looking at an interesting habitat today a little bit later. Now, I also want to chat about another word you're going to hear me use, which is adaptations. So adaptations are things that animals have on their body that help them to survive. So if we think about our own bodies as human, what are some adaptations? What are some things our bodies are covered in that kind of help us to survive every day? I would say the biggest one that comes to my mind is we've got lots of bones in our body, right? You take your hand and kind of feel along your spine here. You feel those little bumps. You feel your backbone, right? You can feel in your arms and in your hands. We have bones that give our bodies structure and allow us to move around, to stand up, to sit. We also, as you can see, I'm using a lot my hands, right? We have hands, fingers. These are adaptations. We use them to pick stuff up and eat and hold things and use tools, right? These are things that not every animal has in their body, believe it or not. Not all animals have bones, right? Not all animals have fingers like us. So we're going to be looking at some kind of wacky or extreme adaptations in the habitat that we'll be checking out today. All right. So now that we've practiced kind of making those observation skills, warming our brains up a little, I think we're ready to move into kind of a weirder habitat, like I mentioned. It's going to be the main topic of focus today, which is going to be the deep sea. So we're going to kind of go on a journey. We're going to leave our kelp forest. It's our ocean backyard, our local habitat here in Long Beach, California. So we're going to say goodbye, farewell to our kelp forest habitat, and we're going to start descending into the deep sea. Now, when we are heading down to the deep sea, ooh, let's see. It's looking really different over here. What are we noticing right off the bat? How does this habitat of the deep sea, we're kind of on the sea floor here, meaning the bottom of the ocean, how is this looking different than the kelp forest that we just saw? Let's take a second and make some observations, because there's a lot of stuff that's really different. We just went way down to the bottom of the ocean, right? It's looking completely different. I'm noticing, first of all, that there's definitely no kelp in this, right? That makes sense because, like I said, kelp's kind of like a plant, so it needs sunlight to make energy. And this is looking really dark down here in the bottom of the ocean. So there's definitely no kelp down here. Now, I'm also not really seeing any animals. Let's see, maybe we'll do an I Spy for a second. Correct me if I'm wrong. We can take a closer look, make sure there's no one hiding. Maybe small animals that might be hiding kind of within some little crevices or behind a rock or something. But I don't see any big fish or sharks swimming around, any rays, any of those big animals that we were seeing in our kelp forest. Seems like maybe there's less biodiversity down here, or at least in this snapshot that we're looking at, right? We're seeing kind of less animals down here. And that kind of makes sense, right? If we were to think about going from our kelp forest, where we're kind of up near the surface of the water, right, we could see there's still sunlight there, all sorts of fish and animals living there. And we're going super deep all the way down to the bottom of the ocean where it's super, super dark, right? Like you can see in this picture behind me, there's not a lot of light. Now, it's kind of confusing or deceiving because this picture is coming from something that's exploring the deep ocean, and it's kind of giving off some light. So it looks like there's light in this picture, but without that camera or the flash or whatever, it would be completely dark, right? If we go really, really deep down in the ocean, it starts to get really, really dark, right? Think about if you've ever maybe gone swimming in the ocean or in a pool. As you go further down, right, the light can't get all the way down to the depths of that water, so it's going to be really dark down there. Now, what else do you might think would be some like other challenges or ways that this habitat is different than the kelp forest that we saw? We mentioned it's very dark, and it's dark because there's no light getting down there. How do you think that would change the temperature? If up near the surface of the ocean, we're getting a lot of light, might be a little bit warmer. If we're down at the bottom of the ocean, do you think it would be warmer or cooler? Take a second and make a hypothesis. That means you're kind of making a scientific guess about what you think. Do you think the bottom of the ocean where there's less light, is it going to be colder or warmer? Put your guesses in there. All right, so if you thought that the bottom of the ocean was cooler, you would be correct, right? Because there is not all this light up there, right? Aside from it just being dark, it's also much cooler down at the bottom of the ocean. So animals that are living down there are going to have to also kind of compete with that, right? It's dark down there, it's cold. Now, there's one other thing that makes life in the deep sea a little bit more difficult. Now, if you've ever gone swimming, or yeah, if you've gone swimming, right, and you dive down to maybe the bottom of the pool or deeper in the ocean or lake or whatever water you've gone swimming in, what starts to happen? You kind of start feeling that water on top of your body, right? Feels kind of heavy. You can literally feel that pressure, the weight of the water pushing on your body. Sometimes I usually feel it a lot in my ears. I have to kind of pop my ears, right? or you can kind of feel it maybe like in your lungs, right? The air in your lungs starts to get kind of squeezed. So the pressure is increasing, right? It means there's all this water above you. You're literally carrying the weight of that on your body as you're getting super deep into the ocean. So that's another thing that makes it really hard for creatures that are living down there. And in fact, if humans were to go down to the bottom of the ocean in these deep sea habitats, we wouldn't be able to survive. The pressure is too great, right? The temperature is way too cold. We're definitely adapted to live on land, right? In lower pressure situations. It's a little bit warmer, there's more light. We need all those things to help us survive. But we're going to take a look today at some of these animals that do not need those things, and they're adapted instead to live in that cold, dark, and high pressure habitat. All right, I see that we have gotten a question. I wanted to finish my little spiel there about the deep sea habitat. We have a question from Deanna from Club 2. They are wondering, are any colonial organisms like tunicates in the deep sea? That is a great question. And the answer to that is yes, there are. There are tunicates like sea squirts, other colonial organisms like siphonophores, which are kind of similar to by the wind sailors. Those are definitely some of those creatures we'll see living down there in the deep sea. Thanks so much for your question. And I love that we're already kind of thinking about some of those creatures we might find down there and how they're going to look really different, right? Those animals are very different than, an animal like me or you. All right. So we've kind of talked about some of the challenges of living in the deep sea. I want to talk about some of the different habitats we might find down there. So right now we're looking at one where we're kind of seeing the seafloor, right? It's a little bit rocky here. We're seeing this picture. But there are other places in the deep sea where we can have animals living. We can have things like, let's see what Isabel's going to throw up. She's going to give us an example of one. Ooh, have you ever seen something like this before? What do you notice in this picture? Let's see if we can figure out what the heck we are looking at. So I'm noticing right away there is smoke over here. What the heck? There's smoke coming out of the bottom of the ocean and somehow into water. So this is what we call a hydrothermal vent or a black smoker. Sometimes at the bottom of the ocean, where there is the crust, right? The crust of the earth is kind of like that outer layer. Oh, perfect. Look at this beautiful picture we have. Thank you, Isabel. And we can see that the crust here, sometimes we get kind of these like leaks up of the hot magma from the more inner layers of the earth, right? Like the mantle. And they will come out of these little vents, right? And we get these black smokers. And look at how hot that temperature is, right? Because it's coming from the middle of the earth where it's super, super hot. 663 degrees Fahrenheit. That is super, super hot. For context, I believe boiling point is 212 Fahrenheit, right? Can Isabel and Jenna? Yes, exactly. So 3 times the boiling point of water, right, is how hot the stuff coming out of those vents are. There's also an interesting thing happening down here called chemosynthesis. So we talked about how plants on land make their own energy from light, right? We call that photosynthesis. So we can kind of connect those two terms together. They're kind of telling us about a similar process, right? So photosynthesis, that first word in it, photo, means light. So that's telling us that these things are getting their energy from light, right? They're synthesizing the light to make energy. Now, here we have chemosynthesis. So what that means is instead of taking light to make energy, they're taking in these chemicals. Here we have, right, the carbon dioxide in the water, just like with photosynthesis. But then they have hydrogen sulfide that they're actually using that comes from these black smokers. And then they're able to make that sugar, right, that energy to fuel their body. So there's some really interesting creatures that live down in these areas that are able to survive based off of that chemosynthesis, right, from these really, really hot hydrothermal vents. Oh, here's another great picture. Check out all of that smoke coming up, right? You can see why it's called a black smoker. This is all the way in the bottom of that ocean, right? We can also see some equipment here that's kind of showing us how we can explore these things, right? How we can learn more about them, how we can collect samples, take pictures, all sorts of stuff like that. And we can see around these black smokers too on the rocks, we're definitely seeing some life now, right? If we think about that first picture, we were kind of just seeing rocks. It's all kind of grayish, brownish color. But here, check out these creatures, right? I believe these are some kind of maybe tube-dwelling worm. I'm not 100% sure. But some kind of animal is living down here amongst these vents, right? So we can see there's tons of life that actually exists in the deep sea. Ooh, here's a great picture of some other creatures we might be able to find. I think we're getting a closer look here at kind of those tube worm looking things. Now, we also have a little friend over here that's joining us? What is this? Yeah, it's a little crab friend, right? So we can also find animals like crabs down here. So we'll see that even in this picture alone, right, I see at least 3 different species of things that are down here. So even though in that first picture it seemed like there wasn't a lot living there, there are areas where we can find tons of biodiversity. All right, so I think maybe we can check out one more habitat. Let's see what Isabel has for us. We can maybe either look at a whale fall or a shipwreck. Have you heard of either of these terms before? Let's see what we're going to throw up. Drum roll. Let's see. If there's a shipwreck, then when a ship falls to the bottom of the ocean, right, that would make a new habitat for all sorts of animals to live in, right? So we've got this beautiful picture here. Thank you, Isabel, where we can see that this is something that existed for us to use as humans, right, to get people across the ocean. And if something happened and it fell to the bottom of the ocean, it actually made like a new habitat for all these creatures to hang out in. So you can see all of these things kind of growing off of it around here, right? Think about all the different like rooms and little crevices that there would be in a boat. Those seem like great places for an animal to hide, right? Make a little home, make a nest. Kind of like how in a coral reef or a kelp forest, the coral or the kelp might be providing kind of those places to make their home. Well, sometimes we can have cool things like this, right? Our ship, where they're using maybe like a man-made, right, item, but it's still serving the same purpose, right? And here it's fallen all the way down to the bottom of the ocean in that deep, dark, cold parts. And it's kind of like a little artificial reef, right? Something for all these creatures to grow and find food and hang out on. So the deep sea can look pretty different, right? Even though it's all really cold and dark down there, we can kind of have some different habitats. All right, so now that we've kind of checked out some of those habitats, let's talk a little bit about exploration of the deep sea. So we talked about those challenges that animals might face living here, right? It's cold, it's dark, and there's really high pressure down there. So do you think if we wanted to explore this habitat, we could just send a diver down there like we would do with a coral reef or a kelp forest? Can we just send like Isabel down there with a camera? Isabel, come take some pictures and show us what you can find down there. I don't think we could, right? I don't think Isabel would make it back from that trip because it's so cold and deep and dark that it's not accessible to humans, right? So, all right, we can't just send a diver down there, but how could we still learn about these things? Clearly, we've got all sorts of pictures and videos and evidence. Sometimes we get samples back. So, clearly, we can explore this habitat. But how can we do that if we can't just send someone down there by themselves or even in a team? We can't just send a human. What do we have to do? If that was your mission, if your mission was to design something to be able to explore the deep sea, what do you think you would come up with? Maybe we could design some kind of like robot or submarine or something, right? That we could send down there, and that could do the exploring for us. And that's exactly what we have done, what scientists have done. So we can see here a little like submarine or something going on over here that's exploring. And we can get a really good look here at how dark that ocean is, right? Because before we were kind of in the perspective of the camera, right, or the little vehicle, but now we're outside of it and we can see where the light's not shining from that little vehicle, it is totally dark down there. No light is reaching the bottom of the ocean. So we can send what we call ROVs. That stands for remote operated vehicle or remotely operated vehicle. And we can send those down. And that means that because they're remotely operated, there's no humans in there, right? It's kind of like almost like playing a video game or like driving a little toy car, right? So we can have people at the top of the ocean in a ship and they have all these screens that they're monitoring all this stuff they can see. We've got tons of cameras that are on the ROV. Perfect. Look, here we're kind of in the control room. And you can see right over here, there's like these little controls. So just like if you were, driving a little toy car or something, they use those controls to control the remotely operated vehicle, right? To send that down into the deep ocean. And that way we don't have to worry about, protecting humans, giving them enough oxygen, keeping them warm, right? Because that would, aside from not being able to go down by yourself, even if we were in a sub, right? The sub would have to be big enough to have a human. We'd have to give them food. We'd have to make sure that the pressure in there is okay for a human to experience, right? We'd have to make sure that they can breathe. They would need oxygen. So it would be super challenging even to send a submarine with people in it. So that's why we like to use these remotely operated vehicles, right? We send the robot down and the computer that controls it will kind of do all that stuff for us so we can safely wait above the water in a nice boat like the one Isabel showed and kind of make the robot do all the grunt work, right? And then we can get samples, pictures, all sorts of stuff, videos. We have learned so much about the deep ocean from missions just like this. All right, so now that we know about how we can get kind of these pictures and videos and learn about what the heck is even down there in the deep ocean because we can't go see it with our own eyes, let's check out some of the animals we might find down there. Now, the first one I want to start with is one that can do something pretty cool. They have an adaptation that's called bioluminescence. Now, that's a really, really big word, but if we kind of break it down, that first part, bio, right, it means life. The second part, luminescence, if we think about something being like luminescent, right, it means light. So bioluminescent is things that are alive that can produce light. So there's actually creatures in the deep ocean. Ooh, and we're seeing a great example here of some of the really weird, interesting looking animals that we'll get. They look very different from animals you might see like in our kelp forest that we first started with, right? These don't look like those same fish and sharks and rays that we saw in the kelp forest. They're looking really different. Sometimes they're super bright colors or even clear or glowing, right? And that's what that bioluminescence was I was talking about. So, if we're in the deep ocean where it's really, really dark, and you're an animal that can make light, how do you think that might help you? Why would that be a good adaptation to have? Well, I think there might be a few ways that it could help. If we start with maybe our friend the shrimp that is bioluminescent, let's take a look at our shrimp friend. Here it is. So, kind of looks like your typical little shrimp friend, right? Red in color, cute little legs, little antennae. But this shrimp is actually bioluminescent. And now, it's not bioluminescent in the way that some other animals are where their body glows. This shrimp does something really cool. They actually kind of like spit out or like vomit almost bioluminescence. And it kind of sprays out. Oh, here's a great picture. Thank you, Isabel, of that. And they kind of spray out this glowing light. And why do you think they might do that? If you were an animal kind of swimming in the ocean and you saw a tasty little shrimp and then it sprayed out all of this light like that might be kind of startling, right? It might kind of scare you. So we call this a defense mechanism, right? It's a way that our shrimp can kind of be like distraction and kind of swim off, right? Because you're so caught up in the craziness of this light. If you're an animal that's never seen light, you're like, whoa, what the heck was that? And then the shrimp can kind of escape, right? So this is one type of bioluminescence. Now, there is another animal that uses bioluminescence in a different way. We don't have a very good picture of this, but I have my little model, my plushie here to show you. Oh, we do have a picture. Sorry, I lied. Thank you, Isabel. Now, have you ever seen this animal before? If you've seen Finding Nemo, you might be familiar with it. This one makes a little guest appearance. This is an anglerfish. Now, which part of the anglerfish do you think is bioluminescent? What do you think? Make a guess, make a hypothesis. Do you think they're like the shrimp where they spit it out of their mouth? Do you think they're maybe like a jelly where their whole body kind of glows? Or is it just from their tail? Or what is this thing in the front of them? Oh, yeah, and I'm noticing this little thing right here. Oh, it's kind of getting green screened out, my apologies. But it's yellow, right? It's a bright color there. So you can see on our picture as well, right? Over here, that there's some light coming out of that. Now, our anglerfish has a bioluminescent, we say it's a lure. And a lure is something, we might have heard that word in like fishing too, right? It's something that is used to attract prey, right? So if this anglerfish is swimming around, right? Imagine we're in the super, super deep, dark ocean, right? And the only light you can see is the little glow coming from the lure on the anglerfish. Now, maybe if you were like a little fish or some other kind of small creature living down there, and you see that, you might be like, whoa, I want to check that out. That's what Nemo did, right? Nemo was like, what the heck? There's something glowing. Let's go see what that is. And then it leads you right to the mouth of the anglerfish, right? So they use it to attract their prey. And then what's waiting right behind their lure? But their big mouths and some teeth to help them catch that prey and eat it. Now, a fun fact that I always have to share when I talk about anglerfish is that whenever you see an anglerfish like this with the big lure, this is actually the female. The males are tiny, tiny. Like, let's say for size, for scale, if this is our full size anglerfish that's female, the male would be maybe about this big. and they will kind of spend their whole lives, their only goal is to find a female. Ooh, here we see a better picture of it as well. Oh, I think the male's attached to this one. Do you spot it? Yeah, it's in this very bottom corner down here. That's perfect. Thank you, Isabel. And so their whole goal in life is just to find a female. And when they find a female, they just stick right to it. And you can actually see the part that's sticking to the female is their mouth. It's a little hard to see, but you can see their tails over here, right? So this is actually their mouth. And they'll stick on like a little parasite, and their mouth, their head actually fuses to the female's body, and they become part of her body. Their blood from the female starts going through the male's body as well, and they're alive because they're just like a little parasite leeching off of the female. Isn't that kind of crazy? So now you know, if you ever see a beautiful anglerfish with a nice lure that's big in size, that's a female. And the males are just these shrimpy little guys that they don't have the lure, they're nothing fancy. We don't even care about them, right? So our anglerfish has that awesome lure, that bioluminescence to help it catch its prey. All right, I think we have time for maybe one more animal. Let's take a look at an animal that has a hard shell on its body. And I think we got a little preview of it earlier. What were we seeing when we were looking at the bottom of the seafloor? Because I forgot to mention, but of course, our anglerfish is swimming around, right? It's kind of in the open wall. We call it the water column, the open ocean. It's swimming around there, right? And our shrimp could, maybe be at the bottom of the ocean, maybe kind of swimming around. But this animal we'll definitely find hanging out on the sea floor, on that kind of rocky or sandy bottom there. Doesn't really have a way of swimming. Do you remember what animal we saw earlier that had a shell on its back, some many legs along its side? What was that? It was a crab, right? So we're looking right here at a picture of a Japanese spider crab. Now let's take a second and kind of make some observations about this crab. Because to me, it looks super different than the crabs I usually see if you go to like a tide pool, right? If you're hanging out on the beach, or even if you've eaten crab, right? These crabs have super, super long legs. They have the longest legs of any crab. And they have kind of on their front two little like pinchers, right? You can see right over here, these guys help them to kind of grab their food. And then they have a little mouth in there too, right? So they're using these little tiny pinchers, these little claws, to grab little bites of food and bring it up to their mouth that way. And we can often find spider crabs or our deep sea crabs in a habitat that I mentioned earlier called the whale fall. So when a whale reaches the end of its life, its body will sink down to the bottom of the ocean. And what's really cool is it'll actually create a whole new habitat for animals to live in, to hide in, to get food from. So we can often find spider crabs around that area because all these animals will gather to eat find food to eat that, to help decompose, right, that body and kind of return it to the ocean. So we can often find these guys hanging out over there. And you can tell they're the spider crabs because of these super, super long legs, right? The name spider crab because they kind of look like a spider with those huge legs versus other crabs that kind of have those shorter legs and their body is more close to the ground, right? You can see our spider crab is super, super high off the ground because its legs are super, super long. All right, so let's head back to the deep sea and kind of summarize what we've learned about today. So we talked about those challenges of living in the deep ocean, right? It was really cold, it's really dark, the pressure is really high. We talked about some different habitats we might find there, right? We can have things like this where there are stretches of the deep ocean where there's not a lot going on, right? Sometimes it's just really cold and deep and there's so much pressure and there's not a lot of places to hide or food, so there's not a lot going on there. But sometimes we'll have habitats like a shipwreck or a hydrothermal vent, right? The black smoker or the whale fall, where all of a sudden we have this huge explosion of biodiversity. All these animals are coming together to find food, right? Or to hide or to create a little habitat there. So even though some places of the ocean, of the deep ocean, are very quiet and nothing down there, sometimes we have these places where there's actually lots of activity. Even though it might feel like nothing can survive down there, we saw all these animals that are actually really adapted to live down there. Things like the spider crab and what did we talk about? Our anglerfish, right? And those bioluminescent animals that can make their own light to help them survive. So pretty cool animals that are living down there. All right, that's going to bring us about to the end of our program. I want to encourage you, if you're interested in the deep sea, keep doing research. Get involved somewhere. When you become older and you want to get a job, right? You can be a scientist. You can be a deep sea explorer. We are still learning so much about our oceans every single day. We don't know that much about them, even though it feels like we do. We're always exploring. We're always finding new species. Maybe one day you could find a new species down in the deep sea. All right, so thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Once again, if you would like to send us any last questions or remarks, shoot us an email at live@lbaop. Otherwise, hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.